Welcome everyone to our next session of the Kimberbell Cup of Cheer Embroider-along with Material Girls. So excited to have you here today on Wednesday, November 22nd, and I know everyone is busy preparing for Thanksgiving. Today we're going to discuss the border quilting. Now, if you are quilting in the hoop and you've been quilting all your blocks in the hoop, you are going to want to quilt your borders with this method. If you have not done the quilting in the hoop for this project, you can continue on page 66 of your book with the information of attaching the inner border and outer border. It does not need to be pre-quilted if you have not pre-quilted the blocks on the inside. For everybody, no matter how you are going to do your border quilting, they're going to be cut the same width. So the inner border, which is the red fabric that's in your kit, we're going to cut 5 1.5-inch strips. The outer border, which is this piece of fabric, you're going to cut 6 4.5-inch strips. And earlier back at the very beginning, I had said you had binding, and then I said you didn't have binding, but I found the binding. It is in the kit. It is wrapped up inside of the outer border that I didn't even find until I opened it up and went to iron it. So you do have binding in your kit. It is this stripe. The instructions call for you to cut 6 2 1/4-inch strips. And you can do that. We won't need that necessarily this week, but if you want to go ahead and cut it, you can. Now, if you are doing the quilting in the hoop, the quilting design that we're going to be using is Border Christmas 4. You can see here in Border Christmas 4, there are 2 designs. So in the 1, 2, and 3-inch widths, we have this little scallop or loop that's going on, and then in 4, 5, and 7, in 4, 5, and 6-inch widths, we have the little houses. So we're going to be using the 1-inch width for the red border, and we're going to be using the 4-inch width for the printed border for this project. The length that we're going to use is going to depend upon the width of your hoop, okay? I'm going to do things a little different just because I can, and it's good to look at other ways to do it. In the chart, she tells you that if you're cutting your fabric width at 1.5, these are the dimensions of your batting, all based upon the length of the file that you're using, okay? So I'm actually going to be using the 12-inch length. So the file I'm going to use is 1 by 12. That tells me I'm going to need battings that are 1.5 by 13, and my hoop field is going to be 1.5 by 11 3/4. So I know I need a hoop that can accommodate that length. In the 4.5, I'm also going to be using the 12-inch length, and I'm going to need to cut batting 4.5 by 13, and I'm going to need a hoop that can accommodate 4.5 by 11 3/4. Now you can go through and quilt just your inner border and work through that. So she tells you to find the length of your border, measuring through the center of the quilt, looking at that particular diagram that is on page 66. So measuring this direction and then measuring this direction for those measurements. Once you have that measurement, so it does not matter if you go this way or this way with the first border. Most of the time we go with the longest border first. So we're going to get that measurement. And if you are quilting in the hoop, we're going to add 2 inches to that border measurement. So I took my border fabrics, my inner and outer border fabric. We're going to Join all of those strips together into one long strip. Okay. And I am going to apply fusible woven to the back side of that strip. So this is all of my inner border joined together on the diagonal in the traditional method of joining your border strips. I applied fusible woven to the entire length of this piece. I'm not going to cut this down to the size pieces that I need for my borders. I'm actually going to quilt this as one really long piece. Then I will cut my borders down as I go to sew them to my quilt. Just kind of eliminates some possible mismeasurements, things along that lines. So I'm going to leave this as one big, really long strip. And I'm going to do the same with my outer border. I have this all sewn together, and then I have applied fusible woven to the back side. And again, I'm going to leave this the full length, and we're going to quilt it as one really long piece of border. Once you have those prepped, so we've ironed our fusible woven to the wrong side, we're going to get the hoop that we're going to use, and we're going to place the light mesh cutaway stabilizer or poly mesh stabilizer in the hoop. And this is where I'm going to kind of differ, okay? I'm going to come over here to this simulator so I can show you what my plan is. I want to make this go as quick as possible, right? It's a lot of really quick quilting, a lot of repetition, and we need a lot of it. It's a big quilt. So I'm actually going to quilt my inner and my outer border together in one hoop. Why not? I have a hoop that's wide enough. I have a hoop that's long enough. I'm going to try it. So I'm going to open up the 1x12 design here on the machine, and I am going to move it to the right or to the left, either way. And then I'm going to add the 4x12 design, and then I'm going to move it to the opposite direction. So I want a little bit of space between these two. I want to make sure that I have them on the same line there. So my Y is set at 0. That way I know they're straight across. And I do have a distance between them. I don't want them to butt right up next to each other. But now I will quilt one inner border and one outer border section at a time. I will have to change threads because I am going to quilt them in different thread colors, which is fine. I just want to maximize the time and hoop sizes that I have to quilt as much as possible. Okay. Now, once we have our quilt design set up, now once you've determined how you're going to do your quilting in terms of you're just going to do all the inner border quilting first, or you're going to do the outer border quilting with it and combine it, it's completely up to you. The ultimate goal is just to get the borders quilted. So the next step is we're going to stitch a placement line for our batting. We will place our batting right side up or right over top of the placement line. We'll tack the batting down, and then we're going to trim the batting close to the stitching line. I'm actually going to do this just like we did our filler blocks. I'm going to pre-cut my batting to the exact size that I need it to be so that I can actually skip the batting tack down line. Okay, just, again, to save just a little bit of time. we have our placement line is now stitched for the fabric. We're going to place the border fabric a 1/2 inch above the batting, aligning the sides exactly with the placement line. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take a piece of my inner border fabric. I drew a line a 1/2 inch down from the top. I'm going to get rid of that selvage, so we're just overlapping this. I have a piece of Kimberbell tape that's rolled up and looped there. I want to put that mark right at the stitched line. And then I'm going to line up my edge of my fabric with my placement line. Okay, so my fabric is there. And now I'm going to run the fabric tack down. We're just going to run straight lines down the sides to hold this straight for us. Fold these down so that they are right sides together, right at where the batting is at. Okay, so I'm going to fold these right sides together, just like that. And then we're going to go back over to the machine. I'm going to walk you through how to rehoop that fabric for our next hooping. So we're going to repeat the process just like we have done previously. So I'm using the same design. Nothing is going to change in the design that we're using. Okay, it's the same file. We are going to stitch the batting placement line. We're going to get our batting in place. We're going to tack it down, we're going to trim it, and then we're going to run the fabric placement line. And then we'll walk through how to get that already quilted piece back into the hoop. Now that our batting is in place, trimmed, and we have a fabric placement line, we're going to take little rolls of Kimberbell tape, just like we did earlier, and we're going to place them at the top and the bottom of this column. We're going to take our border piece. We want the previously quilted section up. We're going to align the fold of our fabric right with the top of this placement line. Okay, so there is the top of that box right at the top of our batting. We're going to place the other one right there with it. So here is the top of our fabric placement line. We have our batting, our quilted piece folded, so the quilted section is up. Okay, we have a little bit of tape at the top and the bottom of that column. We are going to align the fold of that fabric right up at the top of this box. Okay, we're going to carefully unfold this piece, stick it to the tape, and then make sure that this section goes straight and attach it to the piece of tape down here at the bottom. You can fiddle. You don't really want to feel a gap up here, so your battings should basically be butting right up next to each other. So if you feel a hole or anything like that, or too much of an overlap, you may want to fix that. I'm going to take this back over to the machine, run the tack down for this fabric. Now that the inner border is quilted, I'm going to repeat these steps for the outer border. So we're going to run our placement line, we're going to put our batting, tack it down, and then we're going to trim our batting close to the stitching line, and then we will run our fabric placement line. Okay, our batting is tacked down and trimmed, our placement line is stitched. We're going to take that border piece. I have folded it back over the batting. We're going to line it up at the top of that placement line. I'm going to unfold this piece. Just kind of feel where the batting is at, where it ends in this one and begins on this one. Attach it to the sticky loop of tape that's down here at the bottom. And then we're going to return this to the machine, and we're going to tack down the fabric and then quilt the design. Now, when this quilting is finished, you're just going to repeat the same steps that we just did over and over and over again until your length of your border is quilted. So we're going to do the batting placement, put down the batting, tack the batting down, trim the batting, fabric placement line, line up the folded section of that already quilted border, tack it in place, quilt. And you're just going to continue this process until the entire border is quilted. Now, once all your borders are quilted, you can see we have all the yardage here quilted. It's time to work on getting the borders onto the quilt. So again, we're going to take our quilt and we're going to measure through the middle of the quilt. So I'm going to come over and I'm going to measure through the middle of my quilt from one end to the other. and I'm going to take note of that measurement. So for me it's 48. I'm going to cut 2 inner border strips at 48 inches. So I have 2 strips that I've already cut to 48 inches. I just measured it off of my long strip that I quilted. And now I'm going to take that and I'm going to apply that to that long edge of my quilt. I'm going to put it right sides together, and we're going to sew 1/4 inch all the way down both sides, making sure that we backstitch at the beginning and at the end. Now, once your border is sewn on, we're going to head over to the ironing board and we're going to iron this seam. Now, I'm just pressing the seam towards the inner border. I'm not pressing this particular one open. So we just want to press it away from center. Measuring from one red border to the other red border, I'm measuring at 34 1/4. So I'm going to go over to the cutting table. I'm going to cut 2 more border pieces out of the red that are 34 1/4 inches long. We're going to then attach them to the top and bottom border, and then we will press them as well. Now we're going to repeat all the same steps that we just did to put the inner border on to put on the outer border, and we're going to do it in the same order. So since we did the side borders first, we're going to do the side borders the same first as well in the outer border. So I'm going to take a measurement and we're going to call that 49 3/4. Just going to measure one more place. Yeah, 49 3/4. Now I'm going to go cut 2 of my outer border pieces to 49 3/4, and then we're going to attach them to the quilt. Now, when it comes to the outer border attaching, you need to make a decision as to which direction you want your houses to face, whether you want your houses to go around with the base of the house at the inner border, or if you want the roofs of your house to be at the inner border with the houses facing out. Either way works. It's just whatever way you start is the way that I would continue doing the entire quilt. I'm going to do it so that the bases of my house are attached to the inner border all the way around. Right. And when that border is on, it's time to measure through the middle again and get the measurement for our top and bottom. 42 inches is my measurement, so I'm going to come over to the table and we're going to cut our last 2 border pieces at 42 inches. When your last border is on and pressed, your quilt top for the most part is finished. We just have a few more little embellishments that need to be added to the quilt that I will talk about next week. Plus we need to put a backing and binding on it, which we'll also talk about next week. You are on a push to get your project done, definitely by December 1st. You may want to go ahead and attach your backing and stitch in the ditch this project. Like I said, I will discuss this next week because doing all of that quilting for the borders was a lot this week. A lot of just repetitive work. So we'll talk about finishing up our project next week. All right. Well, just as a reminder, once you get your borders quilted, you're going to trim them to the exact length you need, sew them onto your quilt, and just keep repeating. Okay, until your quilt top is complete. Well, I hope that everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving. Happy stitching, and I'll see you next week for our final installment of the Cup of Cheer Embroider-along with Kimberbell and Material Girls. Thanks, everybody.